This episode is brought to you by Active Digital, where we help customer-obsessed companies become destination brands.
To be somewhat dramatic about it, but not really, there are plenty of organizations where the touch points that they have with their customers never leave the digital realm.
All right, folks, today we are talking about customer experience tech. We're diving into customer relationship management. Let's get into it. Do you want to decommoditize your products and services? Do you want to become a destination brand, increase your revenue, and have more control over your pricing? You're in the right place. Each week, we'll talk about how to create great customer experiences and how to orient your company to enable them. We're your hosts, Devin and David, and this is the Experience Leader Podcast. How's it going, folks? Welcome back to the show. We're here for another week of talking about all the various aspects of CX, and I've got my good friend, my brother David. David, how's it going, man?
Devin, what's up, brother? It's a good afternoon, man. Good afternoon.
Yeah. For us, we're like a week out from the end of school. Oh, man, I cannot wait.
This is for anyone that's got, you and I both have young children, like for anyone that's in that phase right now, man, like this part of the spring is just, it's lovely, but it's brutal, man. It's just brutal. It's like, we just got to get there. Like we just so close. We just got to get there.
Some massive school event like every single week. And if you've got multiple kids, it's multiplied. I'm waiting to exhale. I'm waiting to exhale.
I was on an email thread earlier today where there's a soccer tournament parents are planning for, and it went from like, where are we meeting so we can all be there at the same time, to who's bringing tents, to who's bringing like by the time this change, it's like the kids are gonna have a carnival, it's like we have to build a carnival around the soccer tournament that we're also preparing for them. It's like, man, this is not the time of the year that the kids need more stuff. Like I'm just gonna be honest, like it's not.
It's not, but yeah, man, I'm looking forward. Count down the days, baby. Count down the days. Today, we want to get into talking about some customer experience tech. This is something we'll do periodically on the show, is get into the technology that supports providing a great experience. And obviously, we know one of those things really throughout the customer lifecycle is customer relationship management. And we know all the big players out there, Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, et cetera. And I'm really going to spend today, folks, talking to David, really interviewing him, because David has the background of having actually built a CRM in the past and is really knowledgeable about this, not just from running a business and using a CRM, but building it. I'm glad that I get to cheat and interview my co-host for this topic.
Oh man, this one is near and dear to my, it hasn't always been dear to my heart. Depends on the year that you would ask me, but certainly a topic that is near to my heart, one that I've been living, inside and out of for, man, what feels like decades. I guess that's true to some degree, back to, using VB6 code to try to find a way to do that in Access databases before anybody was selling it. But at any rate, this is one that's been in my career, I think, from the beginning, brother.
Wow, man, this is cool. And it connects some dots to me, like once I really kind of learned your origin story, a lot of things started to make sense. I was always like, "What? How the heck does this guy know so much about Salesforce? What? It just seems like it has nothing to do with what he does right now." And then, so I understood some of the backstory. I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
What you're really thinking is like, this guy knows too much about Salesforce. Like, he's probably had a pretty sad life. Like, this is like, I kind of feel bad for the dude. Like this is what you've been doing for 15 years. I'll say it so you don't have to. Yeah.
As a designer, I will say that there are times when I have loved Salesforce and there are times when I have shaken my fist at it. And I realized that it wasn't Salesforce's fault. I realized that it was the implementation. It was how we were using Salesforce. And when Salesforce is working right, man, that is one powerful platform. But you got to use it right, man. It is not foolproof.
It's like the old Steve Jobs where he's like, well, they're holding the phone wrong. That's why it's not working. It's like, I will say, Salesforce's history, to pick on them specifically, they have had a history of a little bit of like, well, you're just using it wrong, and it's like, well, I don't know about that. Like, I'm pretty sure I picked the phone up. Like, maybe there should be grooves where my fingers should go. I don't know, but yeah, good times.
Oh man, that is hilarious. Yeah, we definitely should get into some of that. And I'm just super curious about how you even got into that. So like we mention all the time for our listeners out there, we mention all the time that you ran your own product company for a while. We've never gone into a ton of detail about what that company was. Can you tell us what the company was, what you made, and the market that it served?
Yeah, man, of course. And for me, just because we're on this topic of CRMs and why companies even buy them and why use them. I mean, for me, from the very beginning of my career, including starting things off in consulting, internal, so a shop that was not technical in any way, but needed technology to do the little sort of biz dev and customer relationship management that we needed to do as a small consultancy. And this is coming right out of school. For anyone that's been, and listen, you've been this guy too, Devin. It's like, anyone that's been the technical guy in the room, or at least the most technical person in the room, regardless of what that actually means in reality. I think we've all had varying degrees of that. Early on, I was joking, a few minutes ago about access databases and VB6 code, but for real, man, like for me, my first foray into what was a very rudimentary CRM was, we're dumping stuff in an Excel spreadsheet. It would probably this is early 2000s, right? It would probably be better in an access database because more people can get to it. This is before you could just share 365, right? So it'd be better in an access database, and we don't want to spend the money to stand up like a real database or a real anything for that matter, no real servers or anything. And wouldn't it be cool if we just had a front end where you could enter in some data about customers for the couple people that were doing biz dev, et cetera? And so I remembered coding that up back then where it was like, all right, how do you make access do that? Where it's like there is a database and then there's some functionality on top of it. And like the whole point is if you need to go find something out about somebody, it's in there somewhere, So I've seen, from that to pre-ARMS software, which I'll get to in a second, and the product that we actually built. But even in my time at Red Hat, when Red Hat was still kind of transitioning from pure hardcore open source, we buy nothing off the shelf, right? Even as a $1 billion company publicly traded. And, looking at kind of hand-rolled CRM solutions in that world, for a global company and what that looked like. So I've definitely seen all the flavors of like, okay, what's out there, whether it was myself or a colleague that was out there trying to build the dang thing and what that looks like. But where it became much more of my life than just a tool that I use to do my job sometimes was in the college athletic space. And so I was early stage with a couple other guys with a company called ARM Software. And we built some software from the ground up that was aimed at college athletic departments primarily, right? So the whole and this is a company that's still out there, and so I'll use past tense for me, but it's present tense for the platform. And that was, how do you treat college athletics more like a business that has a lot of the same regulatory needs, has a lot of the, the details are different, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of human beings involved. There is a machine, both financial and procedural and all the rest, right? It's tied into a lot of larger constituencies that all have their version of a pound of flesh to take from it, right? It's the university, the state regulatory bodies, the NCAA, what fans and other kind of like financial components want to take from it. It starts to look very much on the surface like a lot of other highly regulated businesses that are out there. And frankly, for the folks that I went into business with, that was our background, was building big systems for highly regulated environments. And so for us, it was kind of a no-brainer to enter that market and to disrupt it a little bit with some technology. And so when it came to, the concept of a CRM in a very closed market like college athletics, for me, that was my first chance to really think through what does a full customer lifecycle look like? And in that world, it's funny, now I've got kids that are of this age of like, they're still elementary school, but they're old enough to where no one's getting recruited for the pros yet, but it's like you start to have those conversations about travel teams and these things that exist that kind of create paths, right? And you learn like the customer life cycle in that world is from the time a kid is, I don't know, 7, 8 years old and is attending camps and all this stuff until, not to be overly dramatic, but it's cradle to grave, right? Until they die because they are an alum of that university or they're a fan of that university forever, long after a playing career or their time at the school or whatever goes away. And so this transition from younger athlete to potentially recruited athlete to one that's engaging in camps and ID things and all the rest to maybe being recruited actually, you're on campus as a student athlete. What does it look like to be an athletic alum or maybe a non-athletic alum? A lot of folks that are athletes that really get into it, they go back and coach for a while. So now you're a coach in the program. Maybe you go somewhere else. So now you're an ex-coach, but also an alum, but also a fan, right? And it's the same person. Like you're still Devin, right? Devin, that was an 8-year-old that looked like maybe he was pretty good at soccer, is still Devin when you're 95 years old. And frankly, like they're looking to get a little coin out of you to build the next locker room, right?
Everybody that knows me is like, Devin sucks at soccer. He's terrible.
It's such a clean representation of end-to-end customer lifecycle where it's like if you take the digital version of that person, of that Devin, right, from 8-year-old to 98-year-old, and you look at, in this case, the university, right, as the entity of like, well, how does the university view Devin at any given time, whether he's being recruited, whether they're looking to do some fundraising, whether they're just looking to find a way to get Devin the right seats at the football game next year for his season tickets. And they're trying to figure out like where he fits in the scheme of, most important to least important as they're sending out those offer letters, right? That became the challenge, right? Is how do you build that system for that market in such a way that recruiters and coaches and folks running camps and folks that are working on the fundraising side of the house and the marketing side of the house, like everyone needs to know, like, what is Devin up to right now? And, the last thing I'll say, and we can dive in anywhere you want, but the last thing I'll say on that topic is that's when you run into the nuance of, or at least certainly when I ran into the nuance of, okay, it's one thing to talk about life cycle and the happy path. That's easy. Where it gets confusing, to be fair, is Devin just gave us $100,000 to, maybe returf our practice field. And we should know that because our head of development was the person that was working directly with Devin on that because of the dollar value, right? What Devin does not need to get is the email that asks him for $7 because it's donation day for the school, right? Particularly because Devin may not understand that one of those is automated and one of those is high touch. And he's going to feel like they were both high touch and he's just dealing with an idiot, if we're being honest, and he's like, what? You're going to hit me up for $7, Those are the things that it sounds silly, but it matters, right? When you're recruiting kids and the head coach just got done flying into town to visit, and the next thing they get is a form email from the graduate assistant that's like, hey, would you consider paying to come to camp here? Like that does not reflect well on that kid that's a 4-star, You get into the detail of like, what does it mean to treat people the way they would be treated if there was none of this technology and they just walked in the door? What should you know? How should they be treated? How are you going to know what you need to know in order to do that properly? And then how does that manifest itself in how you run your business, whatever that means? In college sports, like it's still a business, right? And it goes on and on. But that was the nuance that got tricky where it's like, okay, that's actually the job of the system, not the databasing standpoint, not the emailing standpoint. That's the easy stuff.
Wow, man. You hit on a couple of things there that I'm just like, man, you are speaking my language, man. And seriously, like I'm still learning. I feel like I'm learning some things as the audience is learning things here, as the listeners are learning, because I feel like I still, as much as we've talked about ARMs, like haven't gotten into that level of detail of what you're in. I mean, a couple things that you touched on, man, the fact that you want to find a way to treat CRM tech like there's no tech there. It needs to behave like it is an extension of the human touch that is as smart as interacting with a human. So if I just gave $100,000 to returf the field and I get an email to donate $7, now me being a tech guy, right? I know what happened. I know exactly what happened.
Yeah, and you'd be okay with that. You'd be okay with that. But
I'm still a little bit annoyed. I'm still a little bit. I'm like, come on, guys. Like, but I'm not mad. Matter of fact, that happened to me today. I was on the way for an appointment and I got an automated text message that basically told me that I missed my appointment. I was like, there's no way I missed my appointment. I know I missed my appointment yesterday and I had to reschedule it. There's no way I missed my appointment today unless you guys are just like running it, real draconian style. I don't know. And so it was interesting. And so I realized, oh no, they're running a day behind and their automated stuff is sending me a message. And then it happened after I got home. And it happened again after I got home and said, we haven't seen you in a while. We'd love to have you come back in. Like I was literally just there.
Yep.
And it's exactly that. You nailed it there. And that's one of the things that I would love to know. There's all kinds of things that I want to dive into, but when you think about how to make a customer relationship management platform work in concert with the humans that are employing it to augment their ability, right? How do you do that? Because obviously there's an element of actually deploying this thing in a way that's smart versus just turning it on and letting it run. How do you do that?
There's so many factors, right? I mean, so when we use something like college athletics and in my experience with ARMS as an example, to be fair, there's some inherent cheating going on there because it's such a closed market that you can really nail your users and those user profiles. I'm talking about on the quote unquote employee side, right? So your recruiters, your camp managers, your coaches, folks that are sitting in the athletic department in varying roles. You can nail those experiences and those customer journeys down to the letter almost. I mean, even now, years later, I could, if you kind of, blindfolded me and said, all right, like you got 5 minutes to tell me exactly what a compliance officer needs to know to be able to do his or her job. Like that's burned into my brain at this point. And I wouldn't be wrong today any more than I was then. It's easy because it is very formulaic. As you start to build platforms that meet larger user bases, obviously the matrixed set of use cases also expands with it, right? And so when I think about your question, one of the things that is incredibly important, there are a bunch of levers that are not only important if you were to build one of these, but it's also important when you think about how to use one of them and configure them appropriately as a customer is, are we talking about high touch? Or are we talking about low touch? High volume, low volume. B2C versus B2B, but then even going deeper on the B2B side, that you might still be high volume. There are plenty of, to be somewhat dramatic about it, but not really. There are plenty of organizations where the touch points that they have with their customers never leave the digital realm. There is no such thing as that person walking in the door. But fun examples are like, oh, I own a bike shop and my marketing team and my sales team does all this stuff to finally get the person to walk in the door. And I know who they are because they're in my system that way. Like that's a fun example because it's a little bit of both. It's like one day Devin will walk in to want to buy a bike because you got him there. And that's awesome. And that is a version of the full, and then Devin will walk back out with his bike and then you can hit him up for all the things that he will want to do after he buys the bike. Great. Lots of businesses though, it's all digital. So it is very, very literally your sales team or customer service team or marketing team, like their only version of that person is the one that exists in the CRM. Like if you want to be really, really specific about it, I always kind of go as far as to say, like if anyone's, I know you're a gamer, like you think about anytime you're playing online and somebody's got an avatar and they have a handle, right? You don't know their name. You don't actually know what they look like. You know how they're representing themselves with the name they're using in the game, with the image that they're using for their avatar, right? It probably doesn't take more than, my guess is if you were to do a study on this, probably within 4 minutes, it doesn't even bother you that they are this name and that. That's who they are. They are that picture and that name, right? If you were to do that in like a CRM and give everyone fake names, kind of the way Google does when you're sharing a doc, where it's like purple unicorn or green frog or whatever, like you could train your sales team very quickly to think about like, oh, that's just green frog again. Like, here we go, because they don't know that person. And I say that to be a bit dramatic because obviously you're going to put in an actual name with an actual LinkedIn reference and all the rest, but everything about that experience, what the person is seeing, what they have access to, how much of the real-time feed that they're getting as a customer service rep, as a sales rep, as somebody who is interacting with that customer, either in real time or even from an automation standpoint. Systems do this behind the scenes, right? Like they're only as good as what you feed them, and they're only smart enough to do what it is you allow them to do before they kick something back out again. That's the playing field, And so you have to look at it that way. You have to almost look at it as though like, well, what if there was no interaction physically? Or if there's going to be, how do we best get our team prepared for that moment where it is in person and we can capitalize on that. I think so often people kind of simplify it down to like, oh, that's my database, right? Or that's my database that we email out of. And it's like, well, that's the only way that your people interact with that customer. So careful. It's more than a database, right? These systems, CRM obviously being one of the main ones, but these systems that you're using, like that's it. Like that's how that customer exists. And I like to think of it as if that customer were standing behind you while you pulled them up on your screen, would they be okay with what showed up on the screen? Or would they look at that and be like, that's not me at all? Like, you guys are missing half the story and you're missing the most important part, if I'm being honest.
That is brilliant, man. That is absolutely brilliant. There are a couple of people that I used to play games online with that I thought they were grown men. Once VoiceCom came out, I found out they were like 12. And I needed to tell their moms what kind of language they used.
There you go.
If they were standing behind me, knew what I thought they were, they'd be like, oh, no, that's not me. But I love your analogy there. I mean, I think that that's fantastic. And that's an amazing way to look at it, that you cannot rely on, hey, that person might walk in the door. And correct me if I'm wrong here, it sounds like what you're saying essentially is if you treat it like this is the representation of the customer that many people within the company are going to see. This is the only representation of the customer they're going to see. So you have to treat it like they're not going to get any other information to make it accurate.
100%. And that's kind of the visceral reaction to that is kind of the visual, the design side of it. Well, what does the screen look like? Or what do the screens plural look like? And yes, of course, that's part of it. But what does the process look like for data coming in and out, right? Same deal. Because if you don't think about that in the same exact way, which is picture, we'll pick on the DMV. I think you and I picked on the DMV again before. We'll do it again. Like, this is where this happens all the time, right? Is like the DMV has you come in to do a thing. They give you bad information as to what you actually need to bring with you, which means inevitably when you show up at the counter, you don't have what you need, which means there is a pause. You need to go figure it out, or you need to come back the next day, which is even worse.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of your nightmare scenario of like, well, why can't we just have the people show up with what they need? It's the same thing with systems, and CRM is a great example of this, where it's like, if the data isn't there, then somebody hasn't done on the, from a process standpoint, from a technical standpoint, the team has not done its diligence to really think through, like, we shouldn't, if it's a customer service call that somebody's taking, if it's a sales call that somebody's making, if it's an email that's being sent, nothing should be missing that is otherwise available, right? I'm not saying that information doesn't come in over time. And obviously, when you get into some of the more next gen stuff around social listening and lead scoring and all the stuff that's happening in real time, those are inputs that are continuing to roll in and change the story a little bit. But basic, or not even basic, but just necessary data for what you do at that point of the journey, like that's a part of it as well. And that's not a screen question. That's a behind the scenes data and process question. It's what are you automating? That thing that goes back out that emails Devin to tell him that he missed his appointment or whatever. Like, what is that wired up to? And how careful was the team in thinking through that workflow before they hit go on it? Because that's also part of the experience. It's all of it, right? It's not just the sexy like UX stuff is great, but it's all of it all the way through.
That's amazing. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are, because you touched on something that is a big deal, is not, if you don't have the information in there, right? It means that somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do at some point along the chain. The reality of that is sometimes people look at that as sort of an administrative burden that is in the way of their job, right? And they don't necessarily understand the importance of that to the organization. I feel like you've probably had a couple rounds with this, maybe several rounds in several different companies. How do you go about getting people to understand the importance of doing that, one? And then two, how do you make it easier for them to do that?
I have the weird like dual brain on this of having been someone who was building one of these systems and thinking through it as a software vendor, but also just as a sales leader or as a leader in the company. How do you think about it, right? Because those are two different lenses. I think on the software side, it's the age-old dilemma of you want to create enough flexibility for folks to be able to build what they need to build to represent their organization, right? In terms of workflow and customization around screens and data modeling and what all of that looks like. while also offering enough rigor that there is real value in some of the automation that you can do and some of the flow and just the screen layouts and things that it's like, well, if you let anyone do anything, everyone's going to end up with like a crayon drawn picture, right? And that's not what you want your product to be. That's probably a longer discussion, but there are elements on the SaaS side that go along. It's why products like HubSpot have done well, right? Because they've nailed, or at least compared to their competitors, they've nailed more of that UX side of things. They've nailed more of the like, what does it mean to have something that is obvious and feels good and kind of matches where people need to be, despite having this wide variety of industries and company sizes they support. As a leader, though, that's probably where more of the onus falls on, in terms of the question that you asked, which is, how do you walk that line between, well, I got to put this in because it's like we have to, and no, this is a necessary part of our flow. I know you appreciate this. We talk about it all the time, but so much of that comes back to forget about what data is going in or out and the screen and all this stuff, and really consider where is the customer at that point in their journey. Again, that goes for somebody who's, a business development representative, an account exec, somebody in marketing who's hitting the top of the funnel, folks that are sitting in customer service, client success. Like, what does it feel like for them to interact with issues at times, right? The understanding of where that customer is in their journey and what is required in that moment is not a question of screens or even optimization for the employee as the first conversation. The first conversation is what is needed by the customer to ensure that they are left feeling like they were satisfied, that they were delighted, that their expectations were met or exceeded in that moment. That's the most important thing, right? And if everybody is able to see that, if you're a leader and you're like, listen, you got to do it because you got to do it, like that's not an answer, right? But showing that employee like, hey, this is where you come in this equation. This is why it's important. Like, okay, now as an employee, like I'm listening, right? Because clearly someone has thought through this and has talked to our customers, et cetera. Now, I may still disagree with like, I really wish that field was up here or doesn't exist. Okay, well, now we're having a UX discussion, right? Now we're just having a discussion around, okay, well, maybe it's not necessary, or here's why it is, because you don't understand that if you don't do that, here's the impact it has on your team and their ability to also delight the customer on that same journey. But it starts with that discussion around, are we all in agreement that this is where the customer is when they're talking to you? And I don't mean physically, but I mean where they are in relation to the brand, in relation to as a paying customer or as a prospect. Like, where are they? Like, you have to be, I don't care if it's the service representative or the CEO, like in that moment of deciding kind of what to do there, everyone needs to understand, like, this is where we are with this customer. And that's why this needs to function in this way.
That's a really great example of how we talk about employee experience, how that winds up affecting customer experience, right? When somebody doesn't do what they're supposed to do and put the right stuff in the CRM, then Devin winds up getting an email that, hey, we haven't seen you in a while. We miss you. Come back in after I just got home from being there, right? Then the question needs to be asked, well, okay, so that means that the person at the front desk or whoever didn't update my profile, my data to say, hey, Devin came in for an appointment on X day, and we need to turn off this drip campaign. We need to turn this off. Somebody didn't do that, but why didn't they do that? Was it because it was difficult? They've got 3 people waiting at the desk. Devin just walked out. By the time they're done serving those 3 people at the desk, those 3 other customers, Devin's not even a thought in her mind. So by the time Devin got the email, she forgot about Devin. She served like 20 other people after Devin. Like, how do we make that easier is the question, I think. A lot of this stuff comes down to how are you empowering your employees to deliver a great experience? That's a prime example.
There is no doubt. And you have to make choices, right? Both when you're developing software that does this kind of thing, and also as you're configuring it and kind of as a customer kind of, dealing with that side of it. You have to make choices on what's most important, right? In that moment of somebody's checking out and somebody's checking in, and technically they should both be happening at the same time, but there's only one person at the desk. What is the company's position on that, right? And frankly, the easy way to handle that as a leader, it's not the right way, is just to be like, they'll figure it out at the desk. Like, and of course, like, yes, you want to trust your people to make smart choices and to use their judgment, but It'd be a heck of a lot easier if there was also some guidance around, no, this always has to happen no matter what because it's important. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it really is a nice to have. We would run into, there was a feature, and this gets into kind of, we talk about CRM and base functionality around. Does the data exist? Can you do simple communication patterns with it, et cetera? Can you categorize it? That's all base stuff. And then every CRM, then you start to build and build and build, right? Ingress, egress of data, right? If the old school version is, what does it look like for this person to exist in real life? And then what does that mean digitally, right? That's kind of just the basic, like, got to have that conversation. The far other end of that is, how do you actually get predictive and do enough listening in real time that you can start to do the really crazy stuff that the system can just take care of, right? So those are extremes. But one of the things that you also find is ARMS, one of the features that we released that was definitely one of these like add-on types was you've got very complicated evaluation procedures in college football in particular. A lot of sports have degrees of complication when it comes to evaluating players, but football is just because there's more manpower and there's just more everything, more money, everything, right? More players too, to be fair. You get in these situations where you might have a 6, 7, 8-step process for evaluating a player where it's the graduate assistant that is doing some YouTube scouring, then if he or she likes what they see, then that goes to the next level. And then eventually it'll get to like an area coach that's responsible for that state. So then maybe they'll actually go to a high school game or pick up a phone and talk to the high school coach or something, right? So it goes through all these gates. And as technology has gotten better, those gates become digital, right? It's video. It's video that's being pulled in from various sources. It is the evaluation metrics, which had always been these cards that would get passed around and literally drop back in the office. And the next person picks up the card and, just super old school, like literally an index card with 8 sections on it. And it would get put in the next person's cubby. And then that coach walks by and just pulls the card from his cubbies. And then he's going there watching game film and putting in his notes and then puts it back in the cubby for the next person. Crazy stuff. So to create the digital version of that is not difficult, right? You just think through it like, oh yeah, all they have to do is set the workflow, set the criteria of like, well, are they manually saying who it goes to, or are they actually picking a position and then it goes to that position coach or whatever? But you find all kinds of interesting stuff, man, where it's like, there were plenty of cases where the person really making the decision was the position coach, but it always had to go to the coordinator after that anyway, because it's hierarchical, right? It's military, right? It's like it's always boss man next and boss man after that, right? And we had these programs where it was like the questions that are being asked of the position coach, he answers them. He rubber stamps it as a 4 or a 5, right? Which means this kid's probably getting invited for an official visit. The coordinator is getting the stuff, never deals with it until he's yelled at for the 50th time. And all he does is just clicks OK. He doesn't look at the video again. He just reads what the position coach wrote. And then it goes to the head coach maybe for approval or whatever, final. And we would ask these guys like, what? Can we just remove the step? You're not doing anything and you're just holding it up. And you find all kinds of interesting information out about like, well, it's just always been this way, right? And that same coach that's sitting there doing all the work and then waiting for someone to approve it is also like, well, why'd you sleep on the couch last night? It's like, well, coach slept on the couch, and if he does, then that means we have to. And then you go and you talk to coach as to why he slept on the couch, and his answer is like, oh, I was just watching TV and I fell asleep. Like, it wasn't because he was working hard, but because he fell asleep on the couch, 7 other people slept at the office that night, like this is the culture though, right?
Oh, wow.
I say all of that to bring out the other side of this. So on one hand, there's the digital side of like, don't make it is still about the people. And you have to be old school about how you think about these interfaces and these exchanges because it is about the human beings. The advantage of digital is that it does point out dumb stuff that people do, where it's like, hey guys, we have the data to prove that the last 200 kids you evaluated were passed directly through by the coordinators. Like, can we please remove that step for y'all so it doesn't take 15 extra days every time somebody goes through? Because you're losing kids when that sits in the coordinator's queue and the school that you compete against is not taking 15 extra days to give them an offer. I don't know what else to say, So that's a long way of me saying like digital is not bad. Like digital gives you that piece of it, right? And that's where CRMs can be super helpful. Just those insights that come out of macro data points and reporting that can show you like, no, this is happening. Like this is happening en masse and this is what you need to do about it.
And some of these things that you're talking about are not things that I would typically think of using a CRM to optimize. To be honest with you, like, when I think about CRM, I often don't think about utilizing it for that. But if the data is there, if everybody's doing their part, you absolutely can leverage the CRM for that. I love that you're kind of showing that there's so much more value to be had from that. If it's done the right way, its value to the business is such a bigger deal than just making sure that you have the right data on the customer at the right time. It can help you optimize business processes.
Absolutely. And I think that's where that term CRM, certainly if you look at a Salesforce.com, the company, not just the sales portion of that, which is, how everything started, they're a perfect indicator of where things are headed in that world from a pure platform perspective, right? I mean, it is everything from early stage marketing through all things that have to do with client and customer management. It's all of it, right? There's a lot of complexity there, but it's also, to your point, it's driving action, it's driving intelligent action, some of which is automated and doesn't require employees to get involved with. It's just stuff that can happen. It's personalization in ways that are not just like, hey, we replaced your first name in the email blast that went out and made it seem like you, but personalization down to, these are things that can be overly dramatic to some degree, but these are things that can change your life or save your life in some cases, right? Because it's not just retailers or college sports programs or consultancies that are using CRMs. It's every type of business, including the ones that are critical to a lot of things, right? And these systems' ability to supplement and in some cases really act as the system of record for core enterprise behavior that is ultimately driving this concept of impact that I think we all want our companies to make. It's right smack in the middle of all of that. A lot of times from a technology perspective, it's a lot sexier to talk about custom building software. It's a lot sexier to talk about even just, in the data world, there's just so much happening right now where it's like, oh, well, there's this and there's that, and this is how you apply AI and all this stuff. But the truth is there are only so many places where your people are touching that data. There are only so many places where your customers pop up as like the version of the customer that everyone needs to trust and attach to, or where all of your other systems are pulling from, not the other way around, right? There are only so many of those core systems. Obviously, ERPs and other things fit this same category of these are core systems. And you can choose to look at them as, dragging you down and archaic and cumbersome and all the rest, or you can choose to actually think about the role that they play for your employees and the amount of time that they need to spend in the system, but also for your customers. And the fact that like in a lot of businesses, that's weird to say because they don't even know it's happening because they're not in your four walls, but that's the only shot they get for them to show up on your radar is in this system, this thing that you're looking at and kind of scowling at every once in a while. Like that's where your customer lives. I don't know what else to say. And so for them, that's their one shot to get in front of you and to have their voice and their expectations heard in the appropriate way. And as a leader, that's the obligation, right? Is to ensure that you're creating that environment within the tools that you bring into your company such that those are carried through, right?
Man, that is awesome. I think that there's a lot that I could wind up going into. We're out of time here. There's so much more that we will get into, especially as we get into conversations on employee empowerment. I think there's a whole lot more to dig into with this on what this can do for employee empowerment. You've made some amazing points here, and a couple of them I'd like to just make sure that we leave people with here is, obviously having a CRM is important. To state the no-brainer point, having a CRM is very important. And also the fact that, as you just said, this, really can wind up becoming the system of record for how you understand customer, how you understand how to optimize your business processes around the customer. You've got to make sure that this thing is easy for your people to do the right thing at the right time so you have the right data. Man, I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom, sharing your knowledge. As always, we will continue to mine that treasure trove later on. But folks, we appreciate you listening. If you have any questions for David, the straight up Salesforce and CRM Jedi Master, send them in to Devin at experienceleader.com. And be sure to follow us on LinkedIn. And until next time, keep outserving your competition on your relentless pursuit to become an experience leader. Catch you in the next one, folks.